Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to Visordown. My name is Toad, and today we are coming to you from the circuit of Portimão in Portugal, where you can see or hear, if you look at these drips that are firing over my shoulder, it has been a mixed bag of weather today. So this has been a two-bike launch. So in the morning, we sampled the relaunched CBR600RR here on the Portimão circuit. In the afternoon, we got to sample the latest generation 2024 CBR1000RR-R SP Fireblade. I'm going to do them as two separate reviews, so if you want to check out the Fireblade video, head over to the Visordown YouTube channel and you can find it there. And of course, as always, there are full reviews of these bikes going up on visordown.com, so do head over and check those out. First and foremost, before we get into the riding, I'm going to talk to you about what is new with the CBR600RR, because there has been a lot that's gone on. Some of it is performance related, a lot of it's related to getting the bike through the latest generation of Euro 5 Plus regulations, and basically that is what has allowed them to relaunch this model, as well as a little bit of love for the supersport sector in the UK, Europe and other regions. So what is new? A lot has gone on in the engine. So the intake, the exhaust, the valves, the exhaust manifold is an all new unit, nothing like the one of old. The catalyzers have been shifted about and moved to try and get it through there. And even the muffler at the back of the bike is still an underseat muffler. Looks very similar to the previous generation that was discontinued in 2017. But within the muffler, there's a lot of work and drilling and venting and holes that have gone on that have really calmed down the exhaust gases as they exit the bike and make it a little bit quieter so it can get through those regulations. So the engine revs higher than before, makes a bit more power than before, but it's still Euro 5 Plus, and I think that is a really big hurdle for Honda to get over. So the valve springs are thinner and stronger, the cams are thinner and lighter, the throttle bodies are now 44mm, which is up from the 40mm of before. Electronically, you have got a whole heap more electronics on this thing than you had on the 2017 bike. So they're derived from the previous generation Honda Fireblade. They're all run through a lovely TFT and very, very simple and easy to use switchgear on the left-hand switch cube. But you've now got 9-level traction control, you've got rear lift control, the ABS system has been improved. So it's a cornering ABS system, and the actual ABS modulator is 2.5 kilograms lighter than it was on the previous generation bike, which is added up to make a 3 kilo difference between the weight of this bike and the 2017 model. You've also got a Honda electronically controlled steering damper, which is a very, very trick bit of kit to find on a bike in the sort of 10,000, 10,400 pound mark. Tyre wise, it's rolling on Dunlop Road Sport 2s, which if I were you, I'd probably ditch them and get something a little bit better, because they're not the best road or track tyre in my opinion. The rider triangle stays exactly the same as it always was, and I think that's quite a good thing, because the CBR600, it was sporty and engaging enough to allow you to have a play on track, but it wasn't quite as extreme as the previous generation Fireblade, i.e. your knees weren't up around your elbows and the pegs were quite nicely set and the bars were a nice distance apart. You've also got, if you look down the front there on the bike, you've also got an all new aero system. Now this is very different from the aero systems that you see on other bikes, and it comes down to the fact that this bike hasn't got the astronomical horsepower of a 1000cc superbike. So what the aero is actually there to do is to control the front end of the bike, not when you're braking, when you release the brake and you're turning the bike into a corner. You might have to be Dean Harrison or John McGuinness to actually feel the benefit of those vents, but they're there nonetheless, and people on track will appreciate that. How have we got on at the track here today? As you can see, this bike is wearing race wet tyres, and it doesn't take much of an idea to understand why, because it has been absolutely soaking here today. We had 2 sessions on track at Portimão. The first one was very, very wet, and then the second one was wet and then it dried, and then you were beginning to get a feel of the bike. But nonetheless, it's been a belter of a day, and it has allowed me to explore exactly what the CBR600 can do. It was the ideal bike to learn Portimão. I'll mention that I've never been to Portimão before. It is a tricky circuit to learn. It's got a lot of undulations. Every corner seems to be just over a blind crest. And so it took me a 10-minute installation session and the 2 sessions before I really knew or thought I knew where it was going. But the CBR6 was the perfect bike to learn it on because none of the corners were coming at you crazy fast. We're on wet tyres, so you can't exit the corner quite as quickly as you can on a dry track on slicks. But it just made the whole experience of getting my head around this new circuit a much, much easier thing to do. The chassis of it is sublime. Like every other Honda super sports bike or 1000cc naked bike they've built, the chassis is one of the standout features, and that is still very, very much the same. It's got real mid-corner poise. It's beautiful on the brakes. The braking system on it, it's got bags and bags of power. The lever's very, very progressive, so you can dial in exactly the amount of braking power that you need. And the forks are really nicely set up, so you've got loads and loads of support on the brakes and loads of feel coming out of the corners. It just behaves exactly as you would want a Supersport 600 to behave. It's very, very compliant and benign. The riding position, like I said, they hadn't changed it from before, and I was really impressed with the riding position because after 2 sessions on the bike, granted it was in the wet, so we weren't going quite as hard as we would have been in the dry and slicks, but you're still hanging off the bike, you're still moving around the bike. And because it's so small, it feels like quite a small bike even for me as quite a small rider. I'm only 5'7". You've got loads of room to maneuver and you can sort of climb over it and it doesn't get in the way, and it just feels very natural in those circumstances when you're coming into corners and you need to hang off the side. Really, really enjoyed the riding position a lot. Engine wise, it is still a Supersport 600, and like I said earlier on, most of the changes that have been done internally with the engine, the exhaust, the intakes, the valves, the camshafts, valve swings, all of that sort of stuff. Some of it has marginally improved the performance and the mid-range torque, but most of it is to get it through emissions. So if you were a big, big fan of the previous generation CBR600, there's still a lot to love. It's still a beautiful little engine. It's like a Swiss watch ticking away beneath you, and then when you ask for the power, it's got this lovely compliant mid-range torque that you work your way through, and then once you hit 11,000 RPM, it just goes nuts and shrieks its way to the red line. I'm going to say as well, despite this thing being Euro 5 plus, they sounded absolutely delightful here at Portimão. We were stood watching the other group of Austrian journalists going around the track, and when they screamed down the straight on full chat, it was really, really something to behold, yet it's still totally road legal. Well done, Honda. I'm not quite sure how you've managed to do that. Basically, this is going to be my little verdict on this bike, because if you were a massive fan of the CBR600RR and you sold your old one and you really want to get the new one just to see what it's like, the reason that Supersport sort of died was because the gap between them and the 1000cc sports bikes, the litre bikes, it was kind of getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and a lot of people were saying, well, why don't I spend an extra £2 grand or £2.5 grand and just get the 1000cc and just ignore the Supersport 600? And there was a lot of that went on. Supersport 600s had gone up in price, and sort of 1000 litre bikes were selling much more, so they were a little bit cheaper. Now your litre bikes have broken the glass ceiling of £20,000, most of them, which makes this, which is £10,400, a very, very appealing option. It will suit newer riders who've maybe come up through the ranks on the parallel twin cylinder super sport bikes that we've got at the minute, like the GSX-8R, the Yamaha R7. They can step off bikes like this and they can get on a bike like this and feel much more at home, much more quickly than they would on a 1000cc bike. And then after a couple of years, 2 or 3 years of riding this and enjoying some road and track riding, they can move on up to a 600. I mean, I've loved it. I've never been to Portimão before. I've only ridden a CBR600 on track a handful of times around Donington, actually in very similar weather to this, which made me feel quite at home. But to come here to Portimão and to sample this and have a go on it, it was the perfect way to start my day. If you've liked that video, folks, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of our latest reviews. And if you want the latest news, reviews and motorcycle features, get yourself over to Visordown.com. Cheers, folks.